U.S. lawmakers probe the prospects for peace and security in South Sudan. Concern over the first U.S. Zika death comes amid a funding stalemate. And the comedian-in-chief has the last laugh at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening. This is Africa 54. I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. Vincent Makori is off today. The world is waiting and hoping that South Sudan can have lasting peace. Last week, the country's new national unity government appointed a 30-member cabinet. Here in the U.S., the Committee on Foreign Affairs held a congressional hearing on the prospects of peace and security for Africa's youngest nation. When South Sudan gained its independence on July 9, 2011, it elicited hope that the region's residents who had long suffered under the Khartoum regime were finally free and ready to build their own nation. But that excitement was short-lived. The last 5 years have seen untold suffering as their two leaders, President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar, waged war against each other and divided the country. U.S. Representative Chris Smith is chairman of Subcommittee on Africa.
More than 2.4 million people have been displaced by the conflict just since December of 2013. 706,600 of them are now refugees in neighboring Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya.
John Prendergast is founding director of the Enough Project. He testified on Capitol Hill on what he termed as one of the most acute humanitarian crises in the world. And he proposed targeted sanctions against those responsible for the violence and corruption in South Sudan.
Our inaction emboldens these folks to continue to commit atrocities on the ground. Violence is still occurring in a number of the states throughout South Sudan, regardless of the machinations politically in Juba. People need to be held accountable for that.
Ranking U.S. Representative Karen Bass visited South Sudan last November and gave an eyewitness account of the suffering the South Sudanese people have endured.
I saw and met victims of physical attacks and the internally displaced, all desperate for access to humanitarian assistance. I also heard about countless accounts of human rights abuses and about the degradation of women and their children in an environment where there appeared increasingly to be a lack of compassion.
Luka Byung-Deng Kuol is an associate professor at Juba University in South Sudan. Although there is a new unity government, he remains concerned about the possibility of another failed peace agreement between President Kiir and new first Vice President Riek Machar.
We may need to invest also in the two leaders, Salva and his Vice President, how to work together. The way that enter into this relationship is going to be very fragile.
Speaking to VOA, John Prendergast of the Enough Project expressed his frustration that in the 5 years that South Sudan has been an independent nation, its citizens have had nothing to celebrate for their independence.
Absolutely nothing has been done to build the infrastructure of the country. There's no service delivery of any significance to the people. The education system is broken. The health system is not delivering needed services.
Donald Booth, the U.S. Special Envoy to South Sudan, cautioned the new unity government that American support for the new peace deal must be accounted for.
The United States is ready to help the transitional government do right by its people. But we need to see that this government will not repeat past mistakes. We are coordinating with other international donors to ensure that any financial commitments in support of the transitional government will be conditioned on its acceptance of international oversight of its revenues and expenditures.
Moving forward as a unity government, there is a flicker of hope that the new leadership can put South Sudan on the path to prosperity and lasting peace. Now, rescuers in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, are searching for survivors after flooding caused a 7-story residential building to collapse Friday night, killing at least 16 people. Authorities said Saturday more than 120 people have been pulled from the rubble and taken to hospitals for treatment since the building came down. An unknown number of people are believed to still be trapped. Flooding and landslides caused by heavy rain has slowed rescue efforts. Earlier Friday, flooding caused a wall at another property in Nairobi to collapse, killing 3 people. President Uhuru Kenyatta ordered an audit of every building in the country last year after 8 buildings collapsed, killing at least 15 people. Attended and supported by 3 African presidents, an anti-poaching summit has concluded in Kenya, resulting in $5 million in pledges and a united message to the world that elephants are worth more alive than dead. The summit culminated at the Nairobi National Park with the largest ivory burn in history. VOA's Jill Craig was there.
They are iconic symbols of Africa, but the poaching crisis across the continent puts their very existence in jeopardy. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta says their deaths represent a death to his country's heritage. So he, along with his presidential counterparts in Uganda and Gabon, came together at the Giants Club summit in Kenya to pledge their support to saving the African elephant, of which tens of thousands are being killed across the continent every year for their ivory tusks. Save the Elephant's founder, Ian Douglas Hamilton, says this high-level commitment is key.
Ultimately, a lot of decisions in Africa get taken at presidential level. If the president is not behind a movement, it's just not going to happen.
In addition to the presidents, the 3-day Giants Club Summit, organized by elephant conservation group Space for Giants, hosted conservationists, diplomats, celebrities, and others to find solutions to ending the poaching crisis. Donors and financiers pledged more than $5 million for elephant protection initiatives in Kenya, Gabon, Uganda, and Botswana. Funds will go toward ramping up frontline protection, improving technological and legal capabilities, building electrified fences, and setting up an endowment fund for protected areas.
I believe that this is going to send a message to the rest of Africa, especially the places where wildlife are. They are going to see what the president of Gabon, the president of Kenya, the president of Uganda have done.
Others, like Rod Potter, a wildlife investigator who works directly on the gruesome side of poaching, are hopeful but hesitant about the summit's outcomes.
Yes, I do think something will come out of it. Whether it's as big as we would like to see, probably not.
At Kenya's ivory burn Saturday, in which 105 tons of elephant ivory and 1.35 tons of rhino horn were destroyed, President Kenyatta pledged his support for a complete ban of the ivory trade during this September's Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. WildAid CEO Peter Knights explains why he and many other conservationists are against the selling of ivory.
We've tried this 2 times. In the 1980s, we were trying to sell ivory legally under a regulated trade. We lost half of Africa's elephants. We went from 1.3 million to 600,000 elephants. We stopped the trade in 1989, and the poaching went down. And then again, we tried again in 2009. They sold 70 tons to China, and suddenly the poaching went up again to 33,000. So you can't put this back on the market, just like you can't put heroin back on the market.
The summit and the ivory burn concluded with this unified message to the world. Ivory has no worth. Only living elephants have value. Jill Craig, VOA News, Nairobi.
Ethiopia is dealing with its worst drought in decades, and children are the most vulnerable to the food shortages, leaving them sick and unable to go to school. Marth van der Wolf reports from the Metahara district, where most citizens are depending on humanitarian aid.
Over 10 million Ethiopians need urgent food assistance because of the ongoing drought. Children are the worst affected as they are the most vulnerable. This mother was admitted to the clinic with her 3-year-old malnourished child.
My baby got sick because there's no food.
These young boys stopped going to school to help out their families after all the cattle died due to the drought. The Ethiopian government is working together with humanitarian organizations by providing food, especially for the 6 million children at risk of hunger, disease and lack of water.
Due to malnutrition or due to hunger, the children are suspected to malnutrition that causes slow brain development and finally it damages their thinking abilities and it may aggravate, for example, diarrhea.
Over $800 million in emergency funding has been provided, but Ethiopia's government and the United Nations say a total of $1.4 billion is needed for this year. The bulk of those funds is to provide food. Receiving aid is the only way this mother can feed her 6 children.
Because of the drought, we have nothing except the government's support. We have nothing at home. We have nothing to feed our children. We don't have drinking water.
Food aid will be needed into 2017 here in Ethiopia and in other parts of Eastern and Southern Africa, also experiencing drought, believed to be caused by the periodic weather phenomenon El Niño. Marten van der Wolf for VOA News in the Metahara district of Ethiopia.
Nearly 3 million people in Malawi are facing food shortages as drought grips southern Africa. The government has declared a national disaster. Southern Malawi has been hit particularly hard. Lamek Masina reports from Blantyre, where people are already feeling the impact.
Dry, scorched fields like this one have become a common sight in southern Malawi. Flash floods and dry spells caused by El Niño weather patterns hit the maize crop, leading to a deficit of about 1 million metric tons. This follows a disappointing harvest last year as well. Crops like potatoes and cassava proved more resilient.
We have long been relying on maize, but this year the crop did not do well. Now we are relying on these pigeon peas we believe will bail us out from hunger.
Families are having to find alternatives to the maize porridge they would normally eat.
Many days we eat pumpkins that we sometimes find in our failed maize field.
Food prices have gone up at the market. The price of maize has tripled.
We have to raise the prices because we have to transport it from farther away. But people are not buying. They don't have enough money.
Nearly half of Malawi's children were already chronically undernourished in 2014. Now, 4% of children are suffering severe acute malnutrition, according to UNICEF. Water sources have also been affected.
Almost all the taps around our area have run dry. In most cases, we wake up around 2 a.m. to try to get water at the only kiosk.
The next harvest is 12 months away. About 2.8 million people already will need food aid into 2017, and aid agencies expect that number to balloon in the coming months. Lamek Masina for VOA News, Blantyre, Malawi.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, the first Zika death on U.S. territory comes as Congress delays funding. Stay with us.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They tell you what people are talking about. So for an in-depth look at the stories trending high on social media, turn to #VOA. It's not your typical talk show. From politics to pop culture, #VOA brings in the people leading the conversation, engages the audience, and gets answers to your questions. #VOA. Smart talk for smart people.
Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is denouncing alleged government attacks on hospitals in Aleppo, Syria. He also called for extra measures to enforce a ceasefire in parts of the country that has seen the most fighting. Secretary Kerry is in Geneva, where he met with UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura, and afterwards said diplomats have been able to restore a ceasefire in parts of Syria. But he says they are continuing to work to get the ceasefire extended to Aleppo.
The attack on this hospital is unconscionable under any standard, anywhere. It has to stop. The last pediatrician who was serving people in the Aleppo area was killed the other day in this hospital, not to mention probably some 250 civilians, some of whom were killed by the other side. So both sides, the opposition and the regime, have contributed to this chaos.
Kerry says he plans to talk by phone with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and de Mistura will be traveling Tuesday for talks in Moscow. Earlier, Kerry met with the Saudi Foreign Minister Abdel Al-Jubeir. As diplomatic efforts intensified, the violence continued in Aleppo, with residents reporting new airstrikes on the rebel-held eastern parts of the city. Now to the European migrant crisis. The Italian government says a NATO-led mission aimed at stemming the flow of migrants from Libya to Europe could be up and running by July. However, there are concerns that the number of migrants could soar as the route through Greece and the Balkans remains blocked. Here's Henry Ridgewell.
Europe's long-term hope for stemming the flow of migrants. Libyan security forces breaking up the smuggling networks. Police in Tripoli raided this safe house last week.
We arrested 203 illegal migrants from different nationalities. They were there with their smuggler.
But the raids are hardly affecting the numbers. More than 16,000 people made the crossing from North Africa to Italy in the first 3 months of 2016, almost double the rate from last year. The United States Monday offered its backing for a proposed NATO naval operation off Libya, but it's not clear what the NATO patrol ships would do with the intercepted migrants.
Some people are talking about flying them back to the respective countries in Africa, but it's clear that the respective African governments are not enthusiastic about this idea. And obviously sending them back to Libya is not really an option at the moment because the Libyan government doesn't have the capabilities.
The West hopes to boost those capabilities by supporting Libya's unity government, known as the Government of National Accord, or GNA. It wants to bring together rival administrations in the East and West.
They are taking over ministries and taking over departments and government buildings, and there is backing at most levels for it. However, the situation in the East is very different, and that's where I think we are facing a stalemate.
Visiting Tripoli last week, Britain's Foreign Secretary said British troops could be sent to train Libyan security forces, and he refused to discount strikes against Islamic State militants. But President Barack Obama ruled out sending American troops.
I don't think it would be welcomed by this new government. It would send the wrong signal. This is a matter of can Libyans come together.
A Western training mission could worsen rivalries in Libya, says analyst Riccardo Fabiani.
We don't know which militias, which groups will make up the future Libyan National Army, who will control the Libyan National Army.
Tensions between the rival groups rose Tuesday after the Tobruk-based Eastern administration tried to make its first shipment of oil via Malta. Tripoli authorities declared the shipment illegal, and Malta has barred the vessel from its waters. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
The first known death from the Zika virus on U.S. territory was reported Friday as lawmakers left Washington for a week-long recess. VOA's Michael Bowman reports neither House of Congress has approved funding to combat Zika, despite increasingly dire warnings from U.S. health officials.
In Puerto Rico marked an ominous milestone for the Zika virus in the United States. A Zika infection is usually not life-threatening, but it may spread from a pregnant woman to the baby. This may result in microcephaly and other severe brain problems.
This is a public health emergency. That's what our public health experts have told us.
The White House has requested nearly $2 billion in emergency funding to target the mosquito that carries Zika and promote the development of a vaccine. The Republican-led Congress has yet to act.
We should at least have a plan from the administration for how the money is going to be spent. There is no plan. It's a blank check.
Democrats note that Congress approved larger sums with relative speed to fight Ebola and the H1N1 flu.
If they won't give the experts the resources they need to combat Zika, what do they propose? We could ask the Zika mosquitoes carrying meat and Zika carrying mosquitoes, we could ask them, don't breed this year.
There's a public health menace, there's a crisis, we have a responsibility to protect the people from it. Do your job, Congress.
With no new funds on the immediate horizon, the Obama administration is transferring unspent money intended for Ebola to fight the Zika virus. Republicans say the maneuver buys time for a better understanding of how future funds will be spent.
So we're going to stay on top of this. We need to find a vaccine. About $600 million is already out the door. We still need answers to the questions about where it's going.
The White House insists the transferred Ebola money is insufficient and that time is of the essence.
We can't fund the fight against Zika a few months at a time. In order to effectively, for example, develop and test and manufacture a vaccine that can be used to protect more than 300 million American citizens, that's a multi-year effort that we're talking about.
U.S. officials believe the Zika-carrying mosquito could spread to at least 30 U.S. states. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, President Obama takes a dig at his critics in a comedy home run. We'll be right back.
L'audience est ouverte.
And welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. President Obama closes out his run as comedian-in-chief.
Miss Sweden, Miss Argentina, Miss Azerbaijan. And there's one area where Donald's experience could be invaluable, and that's closing Guantanamo. Because Trump knows a thing or two about running waterfront properties into the ground.
Obama performed his brand of sharp-tongued comedy at the White House Correspondents' Dinner for the last time, wrapping up with Obama out and dropping the mic while the crowd cheered. The dinner is a long-running tradition that has gone from being a relatively low-key gathering of journalists and their sources to a celebrity extravaganza. The competition among media organizations to invite the most glamorous guests to the dinner is intense. But as you can see, the dinner arrivals are chaotic, and cameramen in the nation's capital aren't accustomed to navigating in a crush of celebrities and their fans. Among the stars who attended the dinner were actors Will Smith and Damian Lewis, and model Kendall Jenner was a big draw. And more good news for the Obamas. President and Michelle Obama's oldest daughter, Malia, plans to attend Harvard University beginning in the fall of 2017. She will wait to enroll until her father leaves office. Malia's decision will make her the latest in a long line of presidential children to attend the elite university in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Both of her parents attended law school there, and that's what's trending today. But have you ever thought about how different foods are made? VOA's Paul Ndiho recently set out on a fact-finding mission to find out how tofu is made. And here is his report.
This is a fascinating story about Martin Sali, a Ugandan-born food scientist at Makori University. Upon completion of the Mandela Washington Fellowship, he moved back to Uganda to start Smart Foods Limited. Mr. Sali has turned his passion into a profitable business with the introduction of new soy foods and industrial soybean utilization.
The idea of doing tofu and the different soy innovations came when I was in my third year as a student of food science and technology at Makori University, where we were encouraged to come up with new ideas which are going to move the Uganda's food industry to the next level.
Tofu is derived from soybeans. It's made by curdling a fresh soy milk, pressing it into a solid block, and then cooling it. In much the same way as traditional dairy cheese is made. It starts with getting dried beans from the farmers, washing the beans to separate the good ones from the bad ones, soaking the beans for a couple hours, and then transferring the beans to a food processor or a highly powered blender to get the soy milk.
We've got the idea of doing innovations in soybean, whereby we can be able to make tofu and be able to spice it up for the market, do soy milks, spice up the soy milk to taste like dairy milk. We come up with vegetarian sausages.
Tofu is a delicacy widely enjoyed around the world, and it's an excellent example of how soybeans can be woven into human food traditions in a way that is natural, inexpensive, and nourishing.
Make sure that the soy milk protein does not stick on the sides of the pan. After getting out our soy milk, which has curdled very well, and we have been able to press out the protein out of the milk using our hydraulic pressing machine, we finally end up with the final tofu that we package very well in vacuum packaging material.
Nutritionists say that tofu has an excellent source of iron, calcium, magnesium, and other minerals.
A block of 5 grams. It's going for about $2.5.
Besides being the ideal food for many vegetarians and vegans, it also packs an enormous amount of healthy benefits into those thin white blocks, including its ability to increase the blood circulation in the body and its iron and copper content.
As a company, we have realized that there is need to serve the low-income earners and the middle class. And so we have also ventured into the soy nuts. They are very popular already in the country. But what we have done, we have taken up the ordinary soybean. Again, now we have added flavor to the soybean. And then we now have the soy nut. It is very nice. It is soft. It has a very nice texture with an awesome flavor.
Nutritionists say if adults replaced meat and dairy intake with soy, tofu, and other soy products, they would also lower cholesterol and in turn would reduce the risk of several chronic diseases, including cardiovascular diseases. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
And that's our show tonight. Good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's News Words.
Does this word mean something good has happened?
Unleashed. The president is sending Secretary of State John Kerry to the Middle East to help build a coalition to defeat the militants who have unleashed a wave of violence that has included attacks on Iraq's Christians and other minority communities, and recently the videotaped killing of American journalist James Foley.
Unleashed means to let something very powerful happen quickly.
It is like taking a leash off a dog and letting it attack someone. In our story, the militants unleashed or set off a wave of violence.
Usually, unleashed does not mean something good.
So, the next time you hear the word unleashed, you will know what this news word means.